The cemetery at Woodlawn had never felt more like a tomb than on that gray October afternoon. Rain fell in cold, slanting sheets across the rows of headstones, and the yellow leaves drifted down from the old oaks like tears the sky could no longer hold back. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called out a single, mournful note that seemed to carry the weight of every grief buried in that sacred ground. Daniel Moretti knelt before a slab of white marble, his expensive black suit soaked through and wrinkled beyond recognition. The man who had once made the entire New York underworld tremble with a single glance now wept like a small child abandoned by the world. His dark hair was plastered against his forehead, and his hollow cheeks bore the ghostly pallor of a man who had not truly slept in 62 nights. The inscription on the headstone cut into him like a blade. Sophia Moretti, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts. In his trembling hand, Daniel clutched a small silver necklace, shaped like an angel with delicate outstretched wings. It had been his gift to her on her 6th birthday, the last birthday he would ever celebrate with his little girl. His mind dragged him back to that cursed weekend. Victoria had offered so sweetly to take Sophia to the family cabin upstate. And then came the phone call at 3 a.m, the cabin engulfed in flames. Only one thing had survived the blaze: a tiny charred bracelet. That bracelet was all he had left to bury. "I'm sorry, my little angel," Daniel whispered, pressing his forehead against the cold stone. "Your daddy had an entire empire, and he could not protect one little girl. I should have died instead of you." He raised the silver necklace to his lips, tasting rain and salt. "Sarah, can you ever forgive me? First you, and now our daughter. I have failed you both." 30 meters away, hidden behind the gnarled trunk of an ancient oak, a pair of small eyes watched him and broke quietly apart. She was 6 years old, thin as a reed, drowning in an oversized wool sweater. Her blonde hair hung in tangled knots, and her tiny fingernails dug into the rough bark with such force that thin ribbons of blood crept down her knuckles. "Daddy, I'm here!" Sophia screamed inside her head. "I'm alive. Please turn around and see me." Behind her stood a young woman in a gray overcoat, her hand resting firmly on the child's trembling shoulder. Emma Callahan, 27 years old, pressed her lips close to the little girl's ear. "Not yet, sweetheart," she breathed. "If they find out you are here, your daddy will be the next one they bury. I promise soon." Sophia bit down on her lower lip until she tasted copper. Every fiber of her being wanted to tear free and run to that broken man, but the gentle squeeze on her shoulder held her in place like an anchor. At the graveside, Daniel finally rose. He placed a single white rose at the base of the marble and stared at it for a long moment. "One day," he murmured, and his voice had changed. The grief was still there, but beneath it coiled something older, darker. "One day I will find whoever did this to you, and I swear on your mother's soul, I will make them wish they had never been born." 2 figures approached Marco and Tony, his most trusted men, silent and respectful. They guided their boss toward the waiting black Mercedes without a word. Daniel walked like a man made of stone. Emma watched him go, watched the slump of those broad shoulders that had once carried her out of an alley 3 years earlier. On another night when the rain had fallen just as hard, her throat closed. "Mr. Moretti," she thought, "please hold on a little longer. I am going to bring your daughter home to you. I swear it." The moment the Mercedes disappeared beyond the iron gates, Emma moved. She guided Sophia down the slope to a battered old Toyota she had purchased in cash. The child crawled into the trunk without protest, curling into a small ball beneath a thick wool blanket. Emma slid behind the wheel. Then she saw it. In the rearview mirror, a black SUV with unfamiliar plates sat parked 200 meters down the lane. A man in dark glasses was watching. "O'Brien's men. Stay calm," she whispered to herself, gripping the wheel. "You are a housekeeper running an errand. You are invisible." In the trunk, Sophia clutched the small brown teddy bear Emma had smuggled out of her old bedroom. She pressed her wet face into its worn fur and whispered a promise only the 2 of them would hear. "Wait for me, Daddy. I'm coming back. I promise." Emma glanced at the dashboard clock. 4 o'clock. 3 hours until Victoria would call the warehouse in Queens to check on her prisoner. 3 hours to return Sophia to that dark, hateful room before the wolves noticed her absence. The Toyota rolled slowly through the cemetery gates, past the watching SUV, past the endless rows of silent dead. From the narrow seam at the edge of the trunk, Sophia could just barely see a single black Mercedes disappearing into the New York afternoon, carrying her father away from her once again. As the Toyota rolled through the slick streets of New York, Emma's hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, and somewhere in that hypnotic sound, Her mind slipped backward through the years, back to another rainy night, 3 years earlier, when the whole shape of her life had been torn apart and stitched back together by a stranger in a black suit. The Brooklyn docks at 11 o'clock. Emma had been 24 then, a junior accountant working late to balance a stubborn ledger. She heard the voices, first 2 groups arguing over a pallet, then a gunshot. A body hitting wet concrete. She dropped behind a container, pressing both hands over her mouth. A boot scraped the gravel. A voice said, "Hey, over there." Then they came for her. Emma ran. Her cheap heels snapped off. Her coat tore on a fence, and the rain blinded her. 3 men followed, 1 with a blade, 2 with pistols. She turned down an alley and hit a dead wall of brick. The man with the knife shoved her hard against it, the cold steel pressing against her throat. "You saw too much, sweetheart," he whispered, and smiled. Then came the headlights. 3 black cars tore into the alley. 6 men spilled out with rifles raised, and behind them stepped a 7th unhurried, a Beretta loose in his hand, the rain beating on his black suit. His eyes found the man with the knife, and in those eyes lived something colder than the blade. "Let her go," Daniel Moretti said quietly, "or you will let her go at the same moment your head hits the ground." The knife clattered to the asphalt. All 3 ran. Daniel did not fire. One survivor was always needed to carry the message home. He turned to her. She was shaking so violently her teeth clicked. Without a word, he slid his long coat from his shoulders and laid it across hers. It smelled faintly of cedar and gun oil. "Did you see anything?" he asked. She shook her head. He studied her a long moment. Behind the ice in his eyes lived something almost tender. "Good. Make sure you never see anything again." He turned to the man beside him. "Marco, get her home safe. Wipe every camera within a mile." He was already walking away when he paused. "Just once. You should find a new line of work, girl. This world was not made for innocent people." 2 weeks later, James, her fiancé, was killed by a car that fled the scene. The police called it an accident. Emma knew better. It was a message written in blood. She had no parents left, no siblings, no one, only the certainty that she would be next. So Emma Callahan ceased to exist. A forger in Queens gave her papers for a life she had never lived. She walked away from the accounting firm, from the small wedding dress in her closet, from the woman she had been, and for 6 long months, she watched. She watched a quiet estate on the north shore of Long Island, memorizing the rhythm of its gates, the rotation of its staff. She learned the old cook was retiring. She learned to cook the way Sarah Moretti had loved to cook, studying recipes by lamplight until her fingers bled. Her reasoning was simpler than anyone would have believed. Emma was not chasing revenge. She was chasing a debt, and the only place in the entire underworld where no man would dare to touch her again was on the other side of the gates belonging to the man who had spoken her life back into being. Rosetta, the old Italian housekeeper, hired her on the spot. Emma's references were flawless. Her risotto was, in the old woman's exact words, a small miracle. For 3 years, she lived as a ghost in those marble halls. She brought tea to Sarah before the world took her too. She held Sophia on the terrible night of her mother's funeral and rocked her until dawn. After that, Emma became the one who braided the little girl's hair each morning, who slipped warm cookies under her door, who sang the lullabies Sarah used to sing. To Sophia, Emma became a second mother in everything but name, and to Daniel Moretti, she became nothing at all. In 3 years beneath his roof, his eyes had never lingered on her longer than it took to hand him a cup of coffee. A nameless maid, a shadow in the wallpaper, exactly as she had intended. Until the day the shadow heard a whisper through a half-closed door and learned that the little girl she loved was not in the ground after all. Emma blinked the memory away as the Toyota reached the outer edge of Queens. In the trunk behind her, that same little girl was still breathing, and this time, the debt was going to be paid in full. To understand how Emma had come to be driving a frightened child through the rain toward a warehouse in Queens, the story had to return once more to the day the Moretti estate first began to die. 2 months earlier, on the afternoon of Sophia's funeral, the great house on Long Island had felt less like a home and more like a wake without an end. The Italian flag over the gate hung at half-mast. The staff moved through the halls on silent feet, their eyes red and swollen. Somewhere on the 2nd floor, Daniel had locked himself inside his study with a bottle of 20-year whiskey and had not spoken in 6 hours. In the kitchen, Emma prepared a dinner no one was going to eat. Her hands trembled as she arranged a plate she knew would come back untouched. The little girl she had braided hair for every morning was gone, and Emma, for all the debts she had paid, had not been able to save her. She carried a stack of fresh linen up to the 2nd-floor library and stopped cold at the threshold. The door stood cracked. Behind it, a voice was speaking soft, precise, nothing at all like the sweet sing-song tone Victoria Sinclair used at the dinner table. "Father, she's still alive," the voice said. "Don't worry, she's secure in Queens. I just need a little more time. Lucas isn't ready to take over yet. When Daniel is gone, the child becomes our final bargaining chip." The tray almost fell. "Alive, Queens." Emma pressed her shoulder to the wall, willing her breath to stay silent. The voice continued, cold as winter glass. "2 weeks from now, Daniel will die of heart failure. Lucas takes the seat. And then the little girl, she disappears for real." Emma backed away 1 inch at a time. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly she was certain Victoria would hear it. She made it to the pantry and gripped the cold marble until the shaking eased. She could not run to Daniel. Victoria had eyes in every corridor. Lucas drifted through the rooms like a patient shadow. One wrong word, and Sophia would die before sundown. Emma would die beside her. That night she took her small car from the staff lot and drove east toward Queens. She knew the address already. Months earlier, she had dusted an old set of deed maps in Daniel's library and noticed a warehouse Daniel had casually loaned to Victoria for what he had been told would be a private art gallery. Emma parked 500 meters down a side street and raised a pair of binoculars. 2 guards paced the entrance. They wore no Moretti colors. On the forearm of the taller man, she saw the mark she had dreaded, a 3-leafed clover crossed by a dagger. The tattoo of the O'Brien family. She tilted the binoculars toward the second-story skylight, and there, through the dusty glass, she saw her. Sophia, thinner than a child should ever be, hair matted, bare feet tucked beneath her on a grade mattress, small arms wrapped around a teddy bear, but alive, alive, alive. Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks, her chest flooded with such a terrible mixture of relief and rage that she had to grip the wheel to keep from fainting. Then she remembered the blueprints, a small cellar window at the rear, connected to a disused ventilation shaft that ran straight up through the walls, a forgotten artery the O'Brien guards could not possibly know about. Emma lowered the binoculars. She could not storm the warehouse. She had no gun, no men, but she could become the one thread Victoria would never think to check. A maid ran errands. A maid bought groceries. A maid was invisible. 2 days later, at 10 in the morning, Emma parked at a strip mall half a mile away and walked through an empty industrial lane. Tucked inside her canvas shopping bag were 3 things: a loaf of soft bread, a bottle of water, and a clean wool sweater sized for a 6-year-old girl. The cellar window was exactly where the old blueprint had promised. The shaft was narrow and filthy and smelled of rust, but Emma climbed. When she reached the grate above Sophia's room, she pressed her eye to the slats and breathed a name like a prayer. "Sophia." The little girl spun toward the ceiling. Her mouth dropped open. Her chest rose with a cry of pure, disbelieving joy that was about to burst free. Emma lifted a single finger to her lips. "Shh, sweetheart, I'm here." Sophia clamped both hands over her own mouth, eyes brimming. Through the tiny gaps in the grate, 2 pairs of hands reached for each other and managed only to brush fingertip against fingertip. Emma's voice cracked, but her words did not. "Listen to me, my angel. I am going to take you home to your daddy. I swear it. But we need time. You have to be strong for me. You have to be strong for him." Sophia nodded, tears streaming silently down her dirty cheeks. "For Daddy," she whispered. And high in the dust above that hateful little room, Emma Callahan began, at last, to build the trap that would one day swallow every one of them whole. The trap, Emma soon learned, had to be built 1 brick at a time, and every brick had to be laid without a sound. By the end of the first week, she had fashioned a schedule as exact as a surgeon's incisions. Every Tuesday and Friday, when Victoria drifted into Manhattan for lunch with friends, a phrase Emma now understood meant a shadowed booth across from Lucas Moretti. The maid disappeared into the city for a grocery run. She parked at the same strip mall each time, walked the same 15-minute route through the same industrial back lane, and slipped through the same forgotten cellar window behind the warehouse. The ventilation shaft had become as familiar to her as the hallway outside her own small bedroom. Her canvas bag grew heavier with each visit. A loaf of soft bread, a small bottle of water, 2 apples wrapped in a dish towel, a handful of the chocolate candies Sophia had always begged for after supper, a fresh wool sweater to replace the filthy one, a tiny coloring book with 3 stubby pencils tucked inside its spine, because no child, Emma decided, should live without at least a little color. But the most important thing she brought was not in the bag. "Sweetheart, listen to me carefully," Emma whispered one morning through the slats. "When they bring your food, you must look very sad, no fighting, no hope in your eyes. Let your shoulders fall. Let your lip tremble if you need to. Can you do that for me? Sophia nodded solemnly from her mattress. I understand, Miss Emma. I'll pretend Daddy is really gone. I'll pretend I have no one left. Emma pressed her forehead to the cold metal of the grate to hide the tears. That's my brave girl. You are as clever as your mother. At the mention of Sarah, Sophia's chin trembled, but she did not cry. She only nodded harder, as if the weight of that memory were something she could shoulder if she squared herself just right. Emma saw, in that small, fierce face, every trace of the brilliant lawyer who had once stood up in court against men twice her size, the woman who had been murdered 4 years ago for daring to testify against an enemy of the Moretti name. Sophia was 6 years old, and she carried her mother's steel already. The survival lessons came next. Hide half the bread beneath the mattress for the long nights. Drink only small sips of water, so the guards would not have to unlock the door too often. Each trip to the bathroom made them snap and curse, and a cursing guard was a dangerous one. Sleep lightly. Always keep one ear open. Never let them see you learn a single word of English they did not already think you knew. Sophia absorbed every lesson the way a thirsty flower absorbs rain. And then, one Friday, the flower gave something back. Yesterday Miss Victoria came, the child whispered, tiny fingers curled through the grate. She was on the phone. She said, Father O'Brien. But Miss Victoria doesn't have a father, does she, Miss Emma? Emma's breath stopped. Remember that name exactly, Angel. Every word you hear is a bullet for your daddy. The visits were never longer than 15 minutes, yet in those small, stolen slivers, the bond between the maid and the hidden child grew into something deeper than blood. Sophia still called her Miss Emma, but her eyes, the way they searched the ceiling for that face, the way they lit when the grate slid open, those eyes were the eyes of a daughter. One afternoon, between bites of apple, Sophia looked up and spoke very quietly. Miss Emma, if I never go home to Daddy, will you keep me? Emma slid her hand through the narrow slats until her fingertip touched the child's tear-stained cheek. You are going home to your daddy, she whispered, and I will be with you always. Wherever you are, I swear it. The danger only grew. One Tuesday, a guard's heavy boots came down the corridor, directly below the shaft, while Emma was mid-climb. She pressed herself flat between two crossbeams, did not draw breath for 10 full minutes, and prayed to a God she was not sure still listened. Another afternoon, during the 3rd week, Victoria arrived at the warehouse without warning. Emma barely had time to fold herself into the narrow closet behind Sophia's mattress, where she crouched in the dark for 40 minutes, listening as Victoria paced the floor and spoke into her phone. Lucas, darling, calm down. 2 more weeks. The doctor's paperwork is already drafted. When Daniel collapses, no one will blink. Emma drew her own phone from her pocket and pressed record. It was the first recording. It would not be the last. Every night after that, Emma sat on the small sill of her bedroom window in the Moretti estate, looking east through the dark toward Queens. She whispered the same words into the glass until they felt like a vow carved in stone. Hold on a little longer, Sophia. I am building the biggest trap this family has ever seen. They are going to pay. Every single one of them. By the end of the 1st month, the trap had a name etched into its deepest corner. Emma had followed the thread of Victoria's phone calls through bank routes, shell companies, and a single slipped sentence overheard in a stairwell. The pieces all pointed the same direction. Victoria Sinclair was not only Daniel's lover and Daniel's poisoner. Victoria Sinclair was the secret daughter of Connor O'Brien, the man who had spent 20 years dreaming of the day the Moretti Empire would burn. While Emma was stacking her evidence in the dark, the house she lived in went on wearing its mask each morning as though nothing at all were wrong. The Moretti estate had its rituals, and Victoria Sinclair presided over them like a high priestess of a dead religion. At 8:30 each morning, she descended the grand staircase in a flowing white silk robe, her dark hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, a silver breakfast tray balanced on one manicured hand. She smelled of gardenia and lavender. She smiled at the staff. She paused to touch Rosetta's shoulder with gentle concern, and then she floated into the dining room to poison the man she slept beside. Darling, you have to eat, she murmured, setting the tray before Daniel with the tender sadness of a nurse attending a wounded soldier. I cannot bear watching you disappear like this. Daniel did not lift his head. He sat at the long mahogany table like a statue carved from exhaustion, eyes fixed on some point beyond the window where his daughter had once chased butterflies across the lawn. In the 2 months since the funeral, he had lost nearly 16 pounds. His cheekbones cut sharp shadows under his skin. Silver had begun to thread through the black hair at his temples, as though grief had reached inside him and pulled the color out from the root. Victoria lifted the silver teapot and poured. The amber liquid hissed softly against fine porcelain. She turned her back for 2 perfectly measured seconds, just long enough to uncurl her fingers from a tiny glass vial, just long enough to let a single pale drop fall into his cup. Then she turned back, all gentleness, and poured a second cup for herself, straight from the untouched pot. She raised it to her lips and took a small, unhurried sip so that he could see. "Drink, my love. I had these leaves sent from a little shop in Rome. They'll help you sleep." Daniel drank without looking. Every swallow was another step down a staircase whose bottom he could not see. Footsteps approached. Lucas Moretti entered the dining room in a gray suit of Milanese wool, a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm and a carefully arranged expression of brotherly concern on his face. "The New Jersey port contracts came in," he said quietly. "But you don't need to look at them, brother. I'll handle everything. Thank you, Lucas." Daniel's voice was a ghost of itself. "You're the only one I can trust now." Something in Lucas's jaw tightened. For the briefest flicker of a second, he hesitated, his hand halfway to the back of his brother's chair. Then his eyes slid across the table and found Victoria's, and the flicker died. He thought of her promises. He thought of the shadow he had stood in for 32 years. He straightened his cuffs and walked on. At 11 that night, the house fell still. Daniel slept heavily, the way a man sleeps when something in his tea will not permit him to wake before dawn. Victoria slipped out of the master bedroom in a dark silk robe and moved on bare feet down the long back corridor that led to the west wing. Lucas was waiting for her. A single lamp burned low beside his bed. A glass of Barolo trembled in his hand. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled him into a hungry, open-mouthed kiss. "I've been waiting all day," she whispered against his lips. Sitting beside him is a slow torture. Lucas laughed low in his throat, tangling his fingers into her hair. "A few more weeks, my love. When he is gone, I take the seat at the head of the table, and I'll be standing beside you," she breathed. "We'll rule together. You deserve it. You always have. You are so much more than Daniel ever let you be. Smarter, hungrier, the man this family should have had from the start." Lucas closed his eyes and believed every syllable. 2 years she had tended that wound in him. 2 years of whispered flatteries, of knowing glances across crowded rooms, of soft observations about how unfair it all was that the eldest son swallowed the entire feast. She had learned his resentments the way a surgeon learns the nerves of a body, one by one. His mother had been the second wife. His inheritance had been 20 cents on the dollar. His entire life had been measured against a brother he could never quite eclipse. And into that old, festering wound Victoria had poured her poison more patiently than any arsenic. "She loves me," Lucas told himself as sleep took him. "She sees who I truly am." He did not know he was a pawn who had already served his purpose. The moment his breathing deepened, Victoria sat up in the dark, reached for her phone, and typed into an encrypted thread. "Father, the plan is on schedule. 2 more weeks." The reply came almost instantly. "C. Well done, daughter. When it is finished, the Port of Brooklyn is your victory prize." She let the phone fall face down on the sheet. Then she turned and looked at the sleeping man beside her, brushed her knuckles lightly across his cheek, and murmured into the dark with a smile that had nothing human in it. "Poor stupid dog. You actually think I love you." She rose, belted the silk robe, and slipped back out into the corridor. At the far end of that corridor, half hidden in the alcove where the service stairs began, a young woman carrying a silver water pitcher pressed herself very still against the wall. Emma had been bringing fresh water up to Daniel's bedside, as she did every night. Now that the master of the house slept so heavily, she did not move, she did not breathe. She watched Victoria's bare feet cross the polished floor at exactly 3 minutes past 3 in the morning. Then she lowered the pitcher, took out the small notebook she carried at all hours, and wrote a single neat line in her careful hand. Tuesday, 3:03 a.m., West Wing, Lucas's door, another brick for the trap. 5 weeks of quiet poison had worked their slow magic. By the time Emma had filled half a notebook with dates and doorway sightings, the man at the center of the estate had begun to look like something already half buried. Daniel's skin had taken on the color of ash. His lips held a faint purple shadow that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. Each morning he coughed into a handkerchief and folded it quickly before anyone could see the rust-colored spots soaking through the linen. His hands, once steady enough to sight a pistol in a lightless alley, now trembled when he tried to sign a contract. He could not finish a meal. He could not finish a sentence. He could not remember when he had last truly slept. Dr. Martinelli, the old family physician who had delivered Sophia into this world and closed Sarah's eyes the day she left it, examined him on a Thursday morning and found no answer he could explain. It may be the grief, Daniel, the doctor murmured, pressing cold fingers to the faint pulse at his patient's wrist. The body surrenders sometimes. A few weeks in Tuscany. Away from all of this, I can't leave New York, Daniel said flatly. The business. And Sophia. I need to be near her. Martinelli nodded slowly. But that evening, in a private lab across the river, he drew 3 vials of blood from his own satchel and paid a young technician in cash to run a full heavy metal panel. The result came back the next morning and nearly knocked the breath out of him. Arsenic. Substantial. Cumulative. The signature of weeks of dosing, not days. He had not yet picked up the phone to call Daniel when his office door opened without a knock. Victoria Sinclair stood in the doorway in a cream cashmere coat, smiling the small, patient smile of a woman who already knew everything she needed to know. "Doctor," she said warmly, "how is your lovely daughter enjoying Princeton? A full scholarship, isn't it? Such a bright future ahead of her. It would be a terrible shame if anything were to disturb it." Martinelli's jaw locked. His fingers closed over the lab report on his desk. Without looking at her, he fed the paper slowly into the shredder beside his chair. Victoria waited until the last strip had disappeared before she turned and left. That same afternoon, while Victoria was out of the house, Emma entered the master suite to change the linens. It was a task she performed with surgical care. She noticed, at the corner of Victoria's vanity, a new jewelry case of soft crocodile leather, an object that had not been there 2 days before. She listened for footsteps in the corridor. None came. She lifted the lid. Beneath the tray of velvet-lined rings, her fingers caught on a hairline seam. A hidden compartment. Inside rested 2 objects. The first was a small glass vial of pale amber liquid without a label. The second was a slim black notebook. Emma unscrewed the vial for 1/2 second and lifted it a breath beneath her nose. She knew that scent. During her accountant years, she had processed invoices for a pharmaceutical firm that handled industrial reagents, and one of those reagents had been arsenic trioxide in solution, a clear, faintly garlicky note buried beneath something sweeter, a poison that announced itself to no one and killed over weeks. She opened the notebook. Dates, times, milliliters, a neat little ledger of murder. Emma photographed every page with the small hidden phone Daniel's future would someday be built upon. She photographed the vial. She photographed the hidden compartment. Then she replaced each item exactly where she had found it, to the millimeter, because Victoria Sinclair was a woman who counted her knives. Her hands shook as she closed the case. Every day she waited now was a day Daniel's liver softened a little further. That night, as rain ticked softly against the windows of the East Wing, Victoria announced she was driving into the city for a late appointment at her favorite spa. The staff nodded. Emma, folding napkins in the butler's pantry, knew better. Wherever Victoria was really going, Connor O'Brien would be at the other end of the table. Daniel was alone in his study. A single lamp burned on the desk. An untouched glass of whiskey sweated beside his elbow. Emma brewed a fresh pot of black tea, arranged it on a silver tray with steady hands, and climbed the stairs. She knocked twice. "Mr. Moretti, your evening tea. Leave it," he said without looking up. "You can go." Emma set the tray down. Then, without turning her face toward the small security camera in the corner, she leaned forward and spoke at the very edge of a whisper. "Mr. Moretti, please do not drink any more of the tea Miss Sinclair prepares for you. Please. Trust me just this once. Pour it out." Daniel's head rose. His hollow eyes sharpened into something older, something the last 2 months had buried. The instinct of the boss, not the bereaved father. "What did you say?" But Emma was already moving toward the door. "I've already gone too far, sir. If you want to live, meet me in the kitchen at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. No cameras. No one else." She closed the door behind her and walked down the hall on legs that threatened to give out beneath her. If he did not believe her, she would be dead by supper the next day. Back in the study, Daniel Moretti looked at the steaming cup in front of him for a long, quiet moment. Then he rose, crossed to the small decorative fern beside the window, and poured the entire contents of the cup into its soil. He did not sleep. He sat in his leather chair until the clock crept toward dawn, turning the maid's words over and over in his mind. A servant, a nameless woman whose face he could not even clearly picture. Why would she speak like that? What had she seen? Just after 3 in the morning, he glanced at the fern. Its leaves had yellowed. 2 of them curled downward and dropped silently to the carpet as he watched. A cold that had nothing to do with the October night settled into Daniel Moretti's bones. At 5:55, he stood. He unlocked the wall safe behind the oil portrait of his father, took out the Beretta he had not touched in months, and slid it into the small of his back. Then he opened the study door and walked, slowly and without a sound, down the long marble stairs toward the kitchen. At 6 o'clock, the kitchen of the Moretti estate was the warmest room in a cold house. The copper pans hung in soft amber light. A fresh pot of coffee breathed its steam into the air. Emma stood at the marble counter, her hands resting on a tray of croissants she had been shaping since 4 in the morning, a simple, innocent alibi for anyone who walked in at the wrong moment. The service door opened without a sound. Daniel Moretti stepped inside in a dark silk robe, his hair still damp at the temples, his right hand tucked behind his back where the weight of the beretta was hidden. He turned the lock behind him with a small, deliberate click. His eyes were knives. 5 minutes, he said. Talk. Who are you? Emma did not flinch. She had been preparing for this conversation for 3 years. She wiped flour from her fingertips, drew the small phone from her apron pocket, and laid it flat on the counter between them. I'll tell you everything, sir. But first, please look. She opened the gallery with slow, unhurried swipes. A photograph of a crocodile leather jewelry case with a false bottom, a glass vial of pale amber liquid, a slim black notebook, page after page, each row numbered in a hand he recognized as Victoria's, dates, times, dosages reaching back nearly 2 months, an audio file he did not play aloud, but whose waveform he would remember. Father, the plan is on schedule. 2 more weeks. A man's deep voice answering from somewhere in Brooklyn. And last, a photograph of a thin little Daniel rose so violently the chair behind him toppled backward. The crash of wood on tile was nothing beside the sound of the beretta slipping from behind his back and clattering to the floor. His hand shook. His entire hand shook. Daniel Moretti had not trembled since he was 17 years old. Sophia, he whispered. The voice that left him was not the boss's voice. It was a father's. She's alive? Emma nodded once, slowly. She is waiting for you, sir. I've been going to her twice a week for 2 months. She is underfed, but she is healthy. She is brave. And she loves you. Daniel sank into the nearest chair and buried his face in both hands. He did not weep the way he had wept at the cemetery. This was a different weeping relief and rage and guilt all tearing at each other inside his chest. 2 months, he said hoarsely into his palms. I cried at her grave for 2 months while you— I am sorry, sir. Emma's voice cracked for the first time. If I had come to you any sooner, they would have killed us both. I needed evidence. I needed a way to bring her out alive. When he lifted his head, his eyes were wet and already beginning to go red, but something else was kindling behind the wetness. The thing New York had not seen in 6 quiet years. Victoria, he said. Lucas, they are dead. Emma stepped closer and placed her palm flat against the counter between them. Sir, please. If you move tonight, Sophia dies first. There are 10 O'Brien gunmen around that warehouse. 1 signal from Victoria, 1 missed check-in, and your daughter is gone. This time for real. Daniel breathed in. He breathed out. She watched the boss climb back into his body the way an old coat settles onto the right shoulders. You're right. I need a plan. He looked at her then. Truly looked. But first, who are you? Why are you doing this? So Emma told him. The Brooklyn docks. 3 years ago. A black coat laid across her shaking shoulders. A fiancé named James struck down 2 weeks later by a car that was never found. 6 months of surveillance on a house she had never entered. A false name on top of her real one. 3 years as a shadow in his hallways. Daniel frowned, searching. Then his eyes narrowed. The girl in the rain, he said slowly. Red hair. Emma's hand drifted self-consciously to her darkened brown ponytail. I did not want you to recognize me, sir. Why? Because you saved my life. I wanted to repay you in my own way. You saved me. Now I save your daughter. He stood. He crossed the small space between them. He laid one hand, very lightly, on her shoulder, the first intentional touch he had given another human being in months. You have done more than that, he said. You saved me too. Something passed between them in that silence, small and unnamed, and they both looked quickly away from it. This was not the morning for it. Daniel straightened. Tell me everything, every detail. How long do we have? A week. 10 days at the most. After that, they finish you. Daniel Moretti smiled for the first time in 2 months. It was not a kind smile. A week is more than enough time for me to die. By 6:30, they had moved. Daniel led Emma up the back staircase and into the small inner study behind his library. The only room in the Moretti estate where no camera had ever been installed, because he had installed the surveillance system himself and had kept one room sacred from his own eyes. He shut the heavy oak door, turned the brass key, and leaned against the wood for a single breath. Then he began to pace. He walked the length of the carpet like a wounded lion, his hands clasped behind his back, the cold rage simmering beneath every step. But the rage was no longer loose. 15 years of running an empire had taught him how to forge anger into strategy. By his third lap of the small room, the plan was already taking shape behind his eyes. "They want me to die of heart failure?" he said at last, almost to himself. "Fine. I'll die in front of them, and when I come back, they will wish they had simply put a bullet through my skull instead of playing this elegant little game." Emma sat very still in the leather chair he had motioned her toward, her hands folded in her lap, waiting. 5 steps, he said, and counted them on his fingers. 1, I get worse, weaker every day. I give them the performance they have been paying for. 2, in 7 days, I collapse at breakfast. A sudden cardiac event in front of Victoria and Lucas. 3, a funeral loud enough that every O'Brien in the city believes it. 4, during all of this, you remain the maid. Nothing changes. You carry my letters to Sophia. You carry her words back to me. 5, after the funeral, we pull her out of that warehouse, and then I begin returning the favor. Emma nodded once, then her jaw tightened. Sir, my daughter. She stopped, her face flushing at her own slip. Sophia, she still has to go back there. Another week in that room. She is 6 years old. I don't know if Daniel's voice cracked. Just once. I know. It is the cruelest thing I have ever asked a child to do. But if I take her out today, Victoria smells it by sundown. She signals her father. The entire family burns within 48 hours, and Sophia with it. He crossed to the chair and knelt before her on one knee, so that their eyes were level. Tell her I love her. Tell her I am sorry, and tell her that in 1 week, her father is coming to bring her home, and nothing in this world will ever take her from me again. They worked through the rest in clipped, quiet sentences. Daniel would continue to accept every cup Victoria prepared for him. Emma would intercept each one before it reached his lips and swap the contents for a harmless brew matched in color and scent. Already steeping in a teapot Emma would keep hidden in the pantry. The real tea would go into sealed glass vials and travel to a private lab Dr. Martinelli once pressured, now possibly turnable, would no longer be able to protect. More evidence, thicker rope. Daniel would grow thinner, paler, quieter. He would cough into more handkerchiefs. He would lean on furniture as he walked. He would let Victoria win every little battle, so that she never once suspected the war. When the outline of the plan was set, Daniel remained kneeling a moment longer. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time in 3 years. You have been under this roof for 3 years, he said softly. Why did you not leave? After Sarah, most of the staff found excuses. You stayed. Emma's eyes drifted to the rug. Because of Sophia, she lost her mother. I could not let her have no one. A pause, a smaller voice. And because of you, sir. You had lost enough. He studied her for a long moment. Who are you, Emma Callahan? I have lived 37 years. I have met thousands of people. Not one of them has ever done something like this for me and asked for nothing in return. Emma gave him a small, tired smile. Perhaps that is because you had not saved enough lives yet, sir. The silence that followed said a great many things that neither of them was ready to name. Daniel stood. The moment slid politely out of reach. He crossed to a concealed drawer in the bookcase and took out a slim black phone, still in its sealed box. He peeled the plastic, powered it on, and placed it in her palm. Untraceable. Every word between us goes through this. Wipe every message the moment you read it. Emma slipped the phone into the lining of her left shoe, professional as any agent. Daniel drew one long breath. Then we begin. From this morning's breakfast onward, I am a dying man. At 7:15, Emma returned to the kitchen and steeped a fresh pot of tea. At 7:30, Daniel descended the grand staircase with one hand trailing along the banister, a slight tremor in his fingers, a dry cough that folded him briefly in half at the bottom step. Victoria rose from the dining room table with a small, pleased smile tucked behind her concern. My love, she murmured, moving to take his arm. You need so much more rest. Daniel let her lead him to his chair. The performance had begun. The week that followed was the longest week of Emma's life. On the surface, nothing in the Moretti estate had changed. The maid polished the banisters, prepared the lamb stew Rosetta liked for Sunday, carried fresh linens up the service stairs, and ran errands for the household. Underneath that surface, every gesture carried a second meaning. Every dish towel folded a code, every grocery list a map, and at the center of it, hidden in the lining of her left shoe, a small black phone that received a single instruction each morning in Daniel's unmistakable hand. The first Tuesday after the plan began, at 10 o'clock, Emma parked at the usual strip mall and walked the usual industrial lane. Tucked between 2 loaves of sourdough bread in her canvas bag lay a folded square of paper, smaller than a matchbook, wrapped in a thin layer of foil. Daniel had written it with a fountain pen at 2 in the morning. My darling Sophia, you being alive is the best news your father has ever received. I am coming. 1 week. Be brave for me. I love you more than this whole life. Daddy. When Emma slid the note through the ventilation grate, Sophia read it twice. Then she pressed the paper flat against her chest and closed her eyes. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, but her mouth did not make a sound. Even her grief had learned discipline. Daddy's coming, she breathed. Daddy is alive. Listen, Angel, Emma whispered. Anything new? Anything at all? Sophia nodded eagerly and crept closer to the grate. Yesterday Miss Victoria came. She was on her phone with a man named Marcus. They talked about the Brooklyn port. They said, when the Morettis fall, the port is ours. And they said a name, Mackenzie. Miss Emma. Who is Uncle Mackenzie? Emma went still. Captain Mackenzie, head of the Organized Crime Task Force. The one man in the NYPD Daniel trusted with his home phone number. If Mackenzie had been bought, the police were a door they could never open. Every name you remember, sweetheart, is a bullet for your daddy. You are doing so well. Sophia proudly handed Emma a crumpled scrap of paper. On it, in an unsteady child's hand, were a dozen lines of dates, times, numbers, and names scratched down in the dark. Footsteps thudded on the stairs below. Someone's coming. Emma pulled herself back into the shaft and froze between the beams, holding her breath so completely that she could hear the ticking of her own pulse against the metal. The door to Sophia's room clicked open. Heels crossed the floor. Hello, little one, Victoria said, her voice sweet as a knife dipped in honey. I brought you some soup. Eat it, darling. I'm so very sorry about all of this. It will be over soon, I promise. Sophia kept her eyes on the floor. Her shoulders sagged, her voice a papery whisper. Yes, Miss Victoria. Thank you, Miss Victoria. Victoria stood over the mattress for a long moment, studying the child as a jeweler studies a stone for flaws. Then she smiled, pleased, and left. The lock clicked, the heels faded. Sophia waited a full minute before she carried the soup to the toilet and poured it down, exactly as Emma had taught her. Emma slid out of the shaft and gathered the little girl into her arms so tightly she could feel both their hearts knocking against each other. You are the bravest child I have ever known, she whispered into the blonde hair. By Friday night, the scrap of paper reached Daniel. He sat at his desk in the private study and read each entry under the lamp, his jaw tightening with every name. The chill in his eyes deepened to something arctic. Mackenzie, he said softly. I personally signed a check for $500,000 into his campaign last year. He is going to regret selling me out. Emma pointed to the final line. Miss Victoria, said Father O'Brien on the phone. Daniel exhaled slowly. So it is confirmed. She is his daughter. That explains everything. He was quiet a long moment, turning a signet ring on his little finger. 2 years ago, he said at last. She walked into a charity gala in Manhattan pretending to be the heiress of an art investor. A convenient cover the O'Briens must have paid a small fortune to construct. Sarah had been gone 2 years. I was lonelier than I had ever been in my life. And she listened. His mouth twisted. She listened the way they do when they are measuring how deep a grave needs to be. Emma spoke carefully. And Lucas? The same script, different lines. Coffee at the gallery. Questions about brushwork. Compliments about his mind, the compliments I never gave him. She whispered to him that she stayed with me only because she feared me. That he was the gentler brother, the smarter one, the real man underneath all of this. Daniel shook his head slowly. So my brother actually loves her, and she has been playing both of us the whole time. Emma was quiet. Then, softly, you pity him. Daniel looked up. The complicated thing in his eyes was very old. He betrayed me, but he is still my brother. Blood does not cut away so cleanly, Emma. She nodded. He looked at her then. Not as a maid, not even as a witness, but as something else entirely, the one ally he had left inside his own house, the woman whose quiet, patient hands were rebuilding his life, one folded note at a time. Outside the study, the grandfather clock struck 11. 6 days to go. To understand how Lucas Moretti had become the man who could stand silently while his brother was poisoned and his niece stolen, the story had to reach much further back than any of Emma's notebooks could carry it. Lucas had been born to the second wife. That single fact had shaped the whole architecture of his life. Daniel's mother had died when the boy's father was still young enough to be lonely, and 2 years later the old man had married Francesca, a Milanese beauty with a quick laugh and a quicker temper, who had given the Moretti patriarch a second son. From the hour Lucas drew his first breath, he was the afterthought, the spare, the boy the family treated like a distant cousin under its own roof. The old man never hid his preference. Daniel was the firstborn, the heir, the son cast in his own image. Lucas was brighter in school, easier with languages, gentler with people, more gifted by every measure the family refused to count. He studied philosophy at Yale while Daniel barely finished his business degree. He spoke 4 languages. He could charm an ambassador over dinner and settle a dispute between 2 rival crews with nothing but a glass of wine and a quiet sentence. None of it mattered. When their father died, the will cut the inheritance 80-20, and Lucas learned at 18 what he had always half known. His own father had not believed he was enough. For 2 decades he had served anyway. He had stood behind Daniel's shoulder as consigliere, as counselor, as architect of every peace treaty the Moretti name had bought. He did not hate his brother. That was the hardest part. He loved Daniel the way a shadow loves the thing that casts it. But he loathed the system that had taught an entire family to look past him as though he were furniture. By 32, he was alone. Women either feared the name Moretti or tried to spend it. Nothing lasted. Nothing was ever just his. Then, 2 years ago, at a gallery on the Upper East Side, a dark-haired stranger paused beside him in front of a Picasso and said, offhand, "Most of the men in our world only notice the price tag. You actually see the brushwork." Lucas had blushed like a boy. Victoria was everywhere after that. A wine tasting, a book signing, a private auction. She knew Italian reds. She knew Greek tragedies. She knew exactly which unfinished sentences to complete for him. 6 months in, on a rainy night in a hotel in Chelsea, she cried softly into his shoulder after their first time together and whispered that she hated herself for being with Daniel, that she stayed with Daniel only because a dangerous man from her past would kill her if anyone weaker sheltered her, that her heart had belonged to Lucas since the Picasso. He believed every word. After that, the poison that entered him was not arsenic. It was permission. Permission to resent his brother openly. Permission to believe that the kingdom had been placed in the wrong hands. "You are smarter than him, darling. You would run this family better. He takes everything and deserves none of it." She whispered it while stroking his hair. She whispered it at breakfast in hotel suites. She whispered it until he woke one morning and found that he believed it with his whole chest. When she first spoke of keeping Sophia safe, her voice was soft as a hymn. "Your brother is not a father. He is a monster wearing a father's face. If we hide her just for a little while, we can give her a real life afterward. A quiet life. With us." Lucas paid $2 million in cash to a crew he thought he had vetted. He did not know Victoria had already routed his request through her own father's people. He never suspected that the professionals he hired carried O'Brien tattoos beneath their cuffs. The plan, as Victoria had explained it to him, was a clean extraneon, a soft disappearance, a weekend in a cabin, a staged accident, and the child placed somewhere gentle until they could claim her. The night the cabin burned, Lucas truly did not know. When the phone call came, he dropped his glass of Brunello on the study floor and wept so hard his own bodyguards looked away. At the funeral, he stood beside Daniel and shook with real grief. Later that night, curled against him in the dark, Victoria had smoothed his hair and whispered the sentence that hollowed him out and kept him walking. "It was an accident, my love. Those men were careless. But we cannot undo it. We can only make certain that Sophia's death means something." So he kept going. He kept going because going back meant admitting he had bought his niece's death for the price of a woman's love. He kept going because Victoria held his hand in the dark and told him he was the only good man she had ever known. Lucas Moretti had one fatal weakness, and Victoria had found it long before the Picasso. He needed, so desperately, to be loved. He did not know that the child he mourned was still alive in a warehouse in Queens, held there as a final bargaining chip his lover had been saving for her real father. He did not know that every tender whisper she had ever breathed against his throat had been spoken first in her head as a line of instructions. And he did not know that the moment she no longer needed him, Victoria Sinclair intended to remove him from the board as efficiently as she had removed everyone else. For now, he slept peacefully beside her in the guest wing of his brother's dying house, dreaming of a throne that would never be his. The 7th morning dawned over Long Island in a gray hush, the kind of stillness that settles over a house the moment before a storm. In the master bathroom upstairs, Daniel Moretti swallowed a small pink capsule that Dr. Martinelli had slipped him the evening before. The doctor, once cornered by Victoria and now quietly turned by the promise of his daughter's safety, had prepared it with the precision of a man who knew the difference between medicine and theater. Muscle spasms, a false collapse of the heart rate, a dusting of foam at the corner of the lips. 20 minutes of perfect imitation, then nothing more. Daniel looked at himself once in the mirror. The hollow cheeks, the sunken eyes. He did not need to act the part of a dying man. He had already been one for weeks. Downstairs, the dining room waited. Victoria poured the tea with a private smile curling at the edge of her mouth. Lucas sat at the far end of the table, pretending to read the business section, his jaw tight in a way he thought no one could see. Daniel shuffled in slowly, one hand braced on the back of each chair as he passed it. "Victoria, my love," he rasped, lowering himself into his seat. I'm not well at all. Perhaps we should call Dr. Martinelli." "My darling, you have pushed yourself too hard." Her voice was velvet. "Drink your tea. I'll phone him right now." He raised the cup, the one Emma had swapped that morning in the pantry, filled with nothing but harmless black tea, and took a slow sip. 10 seconds. The capsule did its work. His hand began to shake. The porcelain cup slipped and shattered against the parquet in a bright, musical crash. Daniel clutched his chest, his lips going a bruised violet, a thread of white foam sliding down his chin. He pitched sideways out of the chair. "Daniel!" Victoria screamed. She was at his side in an instant, cradling his head, her cries perfectly modulated for the staff already running in from the hall. But behind her wet eyes lived a satisfaction she could not quite bury. Lucas shot to his feet, genuinely stricken despite everything he had known this morning was coming. "Brother, Daniel." His voice cracked as he fumbled for his phone and dialed 911, then Martinelli. 8 minutes later, the doctor burst through the front doors with his leather bag, already prepared to do what they had rehearsed. He knelt, pressed 2 fingers to Daniel's throat, made a show of listening with a stethoscope, and finally sat back on his heels with the gravest face of his long career. "Acute cardiac failure," he said softly. "I am so sorry. Mr. Moretti is gone." Victoria wailed and threw herself across Daniel's chest. Her tears were flawless. Lucas stood frozen, one hand over his mouth, because grief, he discovered, is strange. Even a man who knew the play could still feel the blow of the curtain. He stepped out to call for the house physician's assistant. He was gone perhaps 30 seconds. In those 30 seconds, Victoria leaned close to the body she believed cooling on the floor and whispered into Daniel's ear with a smile that was almost tender. "You stupid, stupid dog, Moretti. Finally. Give my regards to your precious Sarah in hell." On the floor, Daniel did not move. He did not breathe. He memorized every syllable. Victoria straightened, wiped a theatrical tear from her cheek, and walked briskly across the corridor into the guest powder room. She shut the door behind her. A moment later, Lucas rounded the corner with his phone to his ear and froze. She was speaking softly through the thin door. "Father, it's done. Daniel is gone. Now Lucas. I'll handle him in the next 48 hours. The blood in Lucas's body turned to ice water. "Father O'Brien." Victoria was Connor O'Brien's daughter, and the woman who had wept on his shoulder 2 nights ago, the woman who had told him he was the only good man she had ever known, was counting down the hours until she pulled the trigger herself. He pressed his back against the cold marble of a column and did not breathe. A noise from him now and he would be the next body on the floor. He made it back to the study on legs that barely belonged to him. He lifted a pen from his desk and wrote into a legal pad, the way he always did, so the staff watching through the doorway would see the consigliere working through his grief. Inside his chest, the world was ending. At 2 a.m, while Victoria was on a call with the funeral director chosen from a list her father had given her months before, Lucas slipped out the rear service door. He took nothing but his passport, a roll of cash, and the small backup pistol he kept in a hollow book on the shelf. He left a folded note on the entry table. "Need to be alone tonight. Back after the funeral. L." Victoria glanced at it, shrugged one silk-robed shoulder, and murmured to herself, "Good. One less thing to manage." She saw a grieving brother. She did not see a man who had just discovered he was meant to die in 48 hours. Lucas hailed a yellow cab on a rain-slick avenue 3 blocks from the gates and vanished into the vast, anonymous Belle of New York. He checked into a 6-story hotel in the Bronx under a false name that had once belonged to a cousin. He sat on the edge of a stained mattress with his gun across his knees. And for the first time in 2 years, he wept without anyone choreographing the tears. Across the river, in the cold basement of a small private hospital, Daniel Moretti opened his eyes in the dark. Dr. Martinelli stood beside the gurney with a folded set of clothes over his arm. Beside him stood Emma, her face pale, her hands steady. "Lucas left the estate at 2 a.m., she said quietly. "Alone." Before Victoria. Daniel sat up slowly, rolling his shoulders against the stiffness. "Why?" he asked. Emma shook her head. "I don't know yet, sir. But something happened after you fell." Daniel swung his legs off the gurney and reached for the shirt. His eyes were clear and cold and awake for the first time in 2 months. "Then let's find out what my brother heard." 3 days later, the funeral of Daniel Moretti became the kind of event the underworld whispered about for a generation. St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan had opened its great bronze doors for many, an emperor of the Shadow City. But few had drawn a congregation like this. 500 mourners filled the pews beneath the vaulted stone. The Bonanno patriarch sat in the 3rd row with his head bowed. The Gambino consigliere offered a silent nod from across the aisle. 2 rival Colombo capos stood side by side, temporary peace sealed by the shared weight of the moment. Senators and state judges who had grown quietly rich on Moretti envelopes dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. Outside the gates, a forest of camera lenses bristled in the cold morning sun. Before the altar stood a coffin of deep mahogany, polished to a black mirror. Inside, instead of a man, lay sandbags arranged to match the weight of one. Victoria arrived on the arm of a cousin who did not exist outside a fabricated family tree. Her black Dior sheath was tailored to the millimeter. A mourning veil shadowed her face. She cried at the moments a widow was meant to cry and touched her throat in the moments a widow was meant to touch her throat, and every gesture was flawless. Then the doors opened once more, and the cathedral hushed. Connor O'Brien walked down the central aisle in a gray silk suit. The last Moretti event he had set foot in had been 20 years ago, and he had been escorted out in handcuffs. Today he came freely, his head bowed in false respect, placing a single white rose upon the coffin. As he passed Victoria on his way back to his pew, his lips barely moved. "Well done, daughter." A lens the size of a thumbnail, hidden in the floral arrangement beside the altar, captured every syllable. 500 meters away, in a safe apartment overlooking 5th Avenue, Daniel Moretti sat before a wall of 12 monitors. Emma stood behind him in a simple dark dress, no longer a maid but something sharper and more essential. Dr. Martinelli watched from a corner armchair. Marco and Tony flanked the door with pistols holstered under tailored jackets. Daniel's eyes never left the screens. "O'Brien and Victoria," he murmured. "Daughter." That one word is a rope long enough to hang them both. Victoria stepped to the pulpit. Her voice, when it emerged, broke beautifully in the right places. "I have lost the man who was my life. Daniel Moretti was the light that walked into my shadow. He was everything." Other Mafia widows in the pews wept in solidarity. Daniel's fist closed slowly around a brass letter opener on the desk. "Snake." Emma laid a calm hand on his shoulder. "Be still. Soon." One seat in the Moretti family row stood conspicuously empty. The press murmured that Lucas Moretti was too devastated to attend. Daniel's eyes flicked to that empty chair more than once, a silent question no one had yet answered. Then, on monitor 7, a camera positioned near the side chapel caught something else entirely. Captain Mackenzie of the NYPD Organized Crime Task Force stood in a quiet alcove, shaking Connor O'Brien's hand with the warmth of an old associate. A folded envelope passed between them and disappeared into a gray coat pocket. Daniel opened a small leather notebook and wrote 4 names in a tight, clean script. Victoria, O'Brien, Mackenzie, Lucas? The last name carried a question mark. For now, the procession of black limousines that rolled toward Woodlawn Cemetery stretched 2 kilometers along the Henry Hudson. At the graveside, beside the small white headstone that had been Daniel's private torture for 2 months, the sandbag coffin was lowered into the earth. Victoria stepped forward with a single red rose and laid it across the lacquered wood. "I will love you always, Daniel," she said, loud enough for every microphone in the crowd to capture it. In the Manhattan apartment, Daniel watched without expression. "Every one of your tears," he said quietly to the screen, "is another bullet." That night, while Victoria lounged in his study with her heels propped on the edge of his writing desk, drinking his 30-year Macallan and murmuring, finally, "All of it is mine," Emma packed a small suitcase in her tiny servant's room. She left a short, weeping resignation letter for Rosetta, saying the grief of the house was too much to bear. No one stopped her. The maid walked out through the side gate in the rain and was gone. An hour later, she stepped into the safe apartment. Daniel was at the window with a glass of water in his hand, looking out over the city that had buried him. "Tomorrow night," he said without turning, "we bring Sophia home." "And after that?" Emma asked softly. He turned. The look in his eyes was steadier than it had been in years. "After that, We dismantle O'Brien. And then he paused. After that, I don't know yet. I only know you will be with us. Color rose quietly in Emma's cheeks. For the first time in 3 long years, she felt the strange, dangerous sensation of belonging somewhere. Outside the window, the lights of New York glittered like a promise. Tomorrow night, a little girl was coming home. By 11 o'clock the next night, a fine rain had begun to fall over Queens again, as though the sky itself insisted on bearing witness. 6 men crouched in the shadow of a rusted loading dock 3 blocks from the warehouse. Marco, Tony, Giovanni, Riccardo, Vincent, Salvatore. 15 years of war between them, and every one of them had pulled Daniel Moretti out of a grave at least once. Tonight they would do it again. Only this time the grave was not his own. Emma knelt on the hood of the black van beside Daniel, tracing lines on a hand-drawn blueprint with a steady finger. She knew this building the way a pianist knows a keyboard. Cellar window at the rear, ventilation shaft to the 2nd-floor corridor. Sophia's door is the 3rd on the left. The 2 perimeter guards rotate every 20 minutes. The next rotation starts in 4. Daniel nodded once. Marco, Tony, front entrance. Make them come to you. Giovanni, Riccardo, roof. Kill the generator before you come down. Vincent, Salvatore, with me and Emma. We go through the cellar. Marco tightened the strap of his vest. And the little one, boss? Daniel's jaw flexed. She comes out breathing. Nothing else matters. They moved. Daniel led the basement team himself. The old cellar window gave way with the faintest whisper of a crowbar. He dropped into the dark first, pistol drawn, and in his hand the weapon trembled ever so slightly, not from fear, but from a feeling he had almost forgotten the shape of. Anticipation. 2 silhouettes paced the narrow basement hall. Vincent and Salvatore took them both inside of 5 seconds, blades moving before either man could inhale. Not a single shout rose into the ceiling. Then the world above erupted. Marco's first burst from the front door ripped through the stillness. Shouts. Return fire. The warehouse trembled as every O'Brien gun on the ground floor rushed toward the entrance. Daniel was already at the stairwell. He took the steps 3 at a time. The 2nd-floor hallway was longer than he remembered from Emma's sketch, and every door looked the same in the emergency lighting. But the 3rd door on the left had a camera angled at its lock, and a line of boot scuffs on the tile outside that no other door had. He knew before Vincent shot the camera from its mount. A broad shape stepped out of the shadow between them and the door. One of the O'Brien captains, heavy revolver already rising. Daniel was faster. 1 shot. Center mass. The man sagged against the wall and slid to the floor. Daniel yanked the handle. Steel. Locked. He put 2 rounds into the mechanism and kicked it open. And there she was. Sophia sat huddled on the grayed mattress in the corner, both tiny hands clamped over her ears against the gunfire, her eyes wide and wet. She lifted her head at the sound of the door breaking, and she saw him tall, dark-haired, framed in the doorway like something out of a half-remembered dream. Her lips parted. "Daddy?" The word was so small it almost did not reach him. "Is that really you?" Daniel's knees gave out beneath him. His pistol dropped to the floor with a hollow thud. He stretched both arms toward her. "Sophia, baby, it's me. Daddy's here. Daddy's here." She flew. Her small body struck his chest with every ounce of strength her starved frame still held. And Daniel closed his arms around her so tightly he was afraid he might break her, and so loosely he was afraid she might slip away again. The man who had killed without flinching wept openly into his daughter's tangled hair, and Sophia wept into the collar of his coat, her tiny fists gripping the fabric as though it were the last solid thing in the world. "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy, I am never leaving you again," he choked into her temple. "Never again, Sophia, Daddy promises." Emma stood in the doorway with her hand pressed flat over her mouth, and for the first time all night she allowed herself to cry. She had waited for this moment for 2 months. She had waited for it, perhaps, since the day 6 years ago when she had stood at the gallery's back gate and watched Sarah Moretti carry a swaddled newborn past her for the very first time. Marco's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Clear, boss, 10 down. No casualties on our side." Daniel rose, the child weightless in his arms. "We're going home." Sophia turned her blonde head against his shoulder and saw the woman in the doorway. A small hand reached out. "Miss Emma." Emma crossed the room and took the tiny fingers into her own. Daniel looked at her over his daughter's hair. For a long second no words were necessary. "You," he said at last. "You did this. You saved her. You saved me." Emma shook her head softly. "We did it together, sir." He lifted his free hand and closed it around hers. The 3 of them linked in that quiet, broken room. "Daniel," he said. "Just Daniel." Outside, The rain was washing the blood off the concrete. Marco was already hauling sealed cases of hard drives and ledgers toward the van. Everything. Boss. Names. Roots. Account numbers. Enough to bury the whole O'Brien empire. Daniel carried his daughter down the stairs with Emma at his side. In the back of the waiting car, Sophia settled between them, one hand in Daniel's, the other in Emma's. "I have 2 people who saved me," she whispered, eyes already closing. "I'm the luckiest girl in the whole world." Daniel looked across her sleeping head at Emma. His eyes said everything his voice had not yet learned how to. The black car pulled out into the rain, carrying a family stitched back together from the ashes of a lie. But the war, Daniel knew, had only just begun. 3 days passed in the quiet stone villa on the north shore of Long Island, the one Daniel had bought under a shell company years ago and disguised as the private retreat of a reclusive Midwestern businessman. Its gates were plain. Its hedges were trimmed too evenly to be noticed. Its walls hid 6 cameras and 4 armed men. Inside those walls, a small miracle began to unfold. Sophia ate. She slept. She asked for a second plate of Emma's spaghetti with San Marzano sauce and fresh Parmesan, and laughed when the cheese stuck to her nose. Color was coming back into her cheeks. Daniel could not stop watching her. Every giggle was a small repair of something inside his chest. He sat in the same kitchen chair for most of 3 afternoons, a cup of coffee growing cold between his hands, simply looking at his daughter exist. On the 4th afternoon, the radio on the counter crackled. "Boss, man at the gate, unarmed. He says his name is Lucas Moretti." Daniel went very still. "Bring him in. Search him twice. Keep Sophia upstairs." Emma rose without a word and held out her hand for the little girl. Sophia's chin set mutinously. "I want to see Uncle Lucas." "Later, Angel. Your daddy has to speak with him first." Emma guided her up the service staircase, her free hand resting against the child's back, her own heart already braced. When the front doors opened, the man who walked in was barely recognizable. 3 days of running had hollowed Lucas out into something smaller. His beard was ragged, his suit was wrinkled and stained, and his eyes were the red of a man who had not been allowed to sleep and had not deserved to. 2 of Marco's men walked behind him with their pistols pressed lightly against the back of his skull. Daniel sat on the leather sofa and did not rise. He did not gesture to a chair. "I genuinely do not know why you came here," he said, his voice as flat as winter ice. "We are brothers. You betrayed blood. You deserve to die." Lucas dropped to his knees on the marble floor and bowed his head. "I know. I am not asking to be forgiven. I came to tell the truth and to die at your hand." Then he emptied himself. He spoke of 2 years of Victoria whispering against his ear. He spoke of the night at the Picasso, the hotel in Chelsea, the careful, slow poisoning of his pride. He spoke of hiring a crew he believed were freelancers, of paying $2 million for what she had called a quiet disappearance, and of learning the next morning that a cabin had burned. He spoke of standing at a small white headstone and weeping for a niece he believed he had killed. And he spoke of a bathroom door in the estate 3 nights ago, and a voice on the other side of it saying, "Father, now Lucas, I'll handle him in the next 48 hours. I thought she loved me," he whispered. "I betrayed the only brother I have ever had for a lie told by a stranger. I do not deserve to live." He drew a small pistol from inside his coat. He laid it flat on the marble and slid it gently across the floor until it came to rest against the toe of Daniel's shoe. "Mine. Shoot me, brother. I will not move." Daniel did not answer. He looked at the kneeling man and saw, instead, a parade of smaller ghosts. Lucas, at 8, pedaling a bicycle he could not yet balance, and shrieking with laughter as Daniel jogged beside him. Lucas, at 18, weeping soundlessly at their father's funeral. Lucas, at 25, taking a bullet in the thigh so Daniel could make it to cover in a Brooklyn alley. Emma appeared quietly in the doorway from the kitchen. She did not speak. She only looked at Daniel with eyes that had already lived through more grief than any woman should carry. Small feet padded down the stairs. Sophia, no, Emma reached for her, but the child had already slipped past. Sophia reached the bottom step and stopped. She saw her uncle on his knees. She saw her father's iron face. She did not understand every thread of what was woven through the room, but she understood that something was breaking. She ran. "Uncle Lucas!" She threw herself into his arms. Lucas froze. He looked down at the small blonde head pressed against his chest, at the niece he had mourned, at the living heartbeat of the child he had helped to steal. A sound broke out of him that was not language. "Sophia, oh God, Sophia, she's alive." He crumpled over her, weeping into her hair. "Forgive me, sweetheart, forgive me, forgive me." Sophia looked up at him with her mother's serene eyes. "Why are you crying, Uncle? I'm all right. Miss Emma and Daddy saved me. Daniel watched his daughter holding his brother. The anger in his chest did not vanish. It simply shifted. It made space for something else. He drew one long breath. Stand up, Lucas. Lucas rose unsteadily, tears running freely down his bearded face. You are my brother. Blood does not cut cleanly. You betrayed me, but you also came back. I will give you one chance. One. I swear I will not waste it. You are going to help me end O'Brien. After that, I will decide what becomes of you. I accept any sentence. Sophia reached up, took her father's hand in one small palm and her uncle's in the other, and stood between them. We're a family. Family always stays together. The Moretti house, wounded but not shattered, came back into formation. The final campaign was about to begin. While the Moretti family was reassembling itself behind the quiet walls of North Shore, the woman who had destroyed it was stretching her limbs in a silk sheet and believing she had won. That same morning, 4 days after the funeral, Victoria Sinclair woke in the master bedroom of the Moretti estate, the room she had once shared with Daniel, the bed she had once poisoned him into. A thin bar of autumn sunlight crossed the duvet. She smiled and arched her back like a cat. Rosetta had already been dismissed, along with most of the old staff. The halls below belonged entirely to her now. Her morning ritual was pleasant and unhurried. She brewed a pot of tea she did not need to doctor. She skimmed the business section. Her phone chimed with an encrypted message from Connor. Father, the will is read in 10 days, daughter. Have you prepared anything special? V. Relax, father. Lucas has vanished, probably killed himself in some motel. Whether he resurfaces or not, I am Daniel's widow. Either signature path works. Everything is mine within 2 weeks. She set the phone down and sipped her tea. Then the second phone rang. The one no one was supposed to call except in emergencies. Carla, one of 3 O'Brien plants still inside the Moretti household, was breathing too fast. Ma'am, we have a problem. The Queen's warehouse was hit 4 nights ago. I only just learned the information was buried. Victoria went absolutely still. What? Her voice cracked like porcelain. Why am I only hearing this now? Our men, all 10, are dead. The child is gone. The teacup shattered in Victoria's hand. Crimson welled up between her fingers, but she did not feel it. She was already dialing. Father, we have a problem. Someone knows. Someone took Sophia. Daniel is dead, daughter. Connor's voice came back, measured but cold. Who else could possibly know? Her mind raced. Lucas. Lucas heard something that night. Before she could even say it aloud, her phone buzzed again. A second message, this time from Vinnie Two-Face, her father's man inside the hospital where Daniel's body had supposedly been processed. Vinnie, body never embalmed. Martinelli signed the papers himself. No one has seen the corpse in 48 hours. He is alive. Victoria rose to her feet so violently the chair toppled behind her. She paced a tight circle in the middle of the bedroom, whispering no, no, no. She had watched him die. She had whispered into his dead ear. She had laid a red rose across his coffin. Father-daughter, listen to me. Connor's voice shifted into the low, clipped register he used only when lives were already in flight. You leave that house right now. No luggage, no farewells. An armored car is already in motion. Back garden, 5 minutes. Do not stop for anything you love. For 20 years, Connor O'Brien had known that Daniel Moretti was the single most dangerous man he would ever share a skyline with. For 20 years, he had kept an armored SUV with 4 riflemen parked 2 kilometers from the Moretti gates, rotating shifts, waiting for the day his daughter might need to vanish in a single breath. Today was that day. Victoria did not hesitate. She crossed to the locked rosewood drawer of her vanity, entered the code, and withdrew the single item that mattered more than any jewelry in that room, a slim black flash drive. 2 years of Moretti secrets lay inside it, troop rosters, shipping schedules, every bribe paid to Captain Mackenzie, and to 6 other officials whose names had never been spoken aloud, the Swiss account numbers, every nail she needed to drive. She left everything else. The diamond Daniel had slid onto her finger in a Positano Terrace restaurant, the closets of Dior and Valentino, the rope of black pearls Sarah had once worn. She took only the drive and a small nickel-plated pistol, and slipped out through the servants' corridor into the east garden. The armored SUV was already waiting at the rear service gate. Engine hushed, rear door open. 4 men with short-barreled rifles acknowledged her with curt nods as she climbed in. Connor had ordered the rest of the O'Brien plants in the estate to remain behind as decoys, expendable noise. Nothing more. As the vehicle pulled smoothly onto the long gravel drive, Victoria looked back once through the tinted rear window at the white marble facade she had crowned herself queen of only that morning. The contempt that had always lived in her face returned like a reflex. "Goodbye, Mr. Moretti," she murmured to the empty air. "If you really are still breathing next time we meet, you will kneel at my feet, and I will not only kill you, I will kill your daughter too, properly this time." The SUV turned onto the parkway and accelerated toward Brooklyn, toward home, toward the one borough in New York, where Daniel Moretti could not yet walk freely. 30 minutes later, Emma lowered her burner phone in the kitchen of the North Shore safe house and looked at Daniel. She ran. "She's with O'Brien in Brooklyn." Daniel did not flinch. "I expected that. She moved faster than I thought she would." Lucas frowned over the map spread across the dining table. "Brother, if she's back with her father, they will mobilize the entire O'Brien family. Full-scale war." Daniel's eyes met his brother's for a long, steady moment. "That, little brother, is exactly what I want. This time, we end the O'Briens for good." Outside the windows, the first cold wind of November rattled the bare branches. Two families, on two sides of New York, began to sharpen their knives. While Lucas and the men at the North Shore safe house began mapping the O'Brien footprint across Brooklyn, the villa itself slipped, almost without anyone noticing, into a shape none of its 3 occupants had ever expected to inhabit: a home. Sophia recovered faster than any of them had dared to hope. Emma's kitchen did most of the work. There was fresh pasta on Mondays, soft focaccia on Wednesdays, and a small square of dark chocolate cake every single night, which Sophia demanded with the seriousness of a general signing a treaty. She put on weight. Her cheeks pinked. Her laugh came back first in small, cautious bursts. Then in the open, ringing way Daniel remembered from the year before the world broke. One early morning, Emma was shaping dough on the marble island, her sleeves pushed above her elbows, a dusting of flour along her jaw. Daniel walked in with his hair still damp from the shower, a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. No tie, no holster. In 3 full years under the same roof, they had never stood this close in a kitchen without a tray between them. He reached for the coffee pot. Her hand reached at the same moment. Their fingers brushed. They both apologized at the same instant. They both colored at the same instant. Daniel set the pot down slowly. "Sophia told me last night that she wants you to stay. Forever." Emma's hands stilled on the dough. She's only a child. She doesn't understand what she's saying. She understands exactly what she's saying. "And so do I, Emma." She put the knife down, wiped her palms on her apron, would not meet his eyes. "Sir Daniel, I'm not worthy of. You have been worthy since the night at the Brooklyn docks." His voice was low and certain. "You have been worthy for 3 years of loving my daughter while I could not even see you. You have been worthy every time you climbed into that vent and risked your life for her." He lifted her hand carefully and held it between both of his. "I'm the one who isn't worthy of you. I'm a mafia boss, Emma. I buried my wife because of the life I lead. You shouldn't be in this, I'm already in it," she said quietly. "I have been since that night in the rain. I was never going to leave, Daniel. Not even if you told me to." He lifted his hand and brushed a strand of her hair back from her cheek. The brown had grown out. The red he remembered from a drenched alley 3 years ago was returning at her roots like something refusing to stay hidden. He leaned down and kissed her. Softly, briefly. Not the kiss of a hungry man. Only the kiss of a man admitting something to himself that he had been denying for a long time. Emma breathed out a small, unsteady laugh. "I have been waiting for that for 3 years. I didn't know I was waiting," Daniel murmured. "But I know now." "Daddy, Mama, Emma." Both of them turned at the same time. Sophia stood in the kitchen doorway in a pink robe and bare feet, her battered teddy bear tucked under one arm, a grin of pure, triumphant satisfaction across her face. "I knew," she announced. "I knew it a long time ago. Mama Emma belongs to you. You belong to Mama Emma. And I belong to both of you." Daniel scooped her up into the air with one arm. "My daughter is smarter than her father." Sophia placed a small, solemn palm against his unshaven cheek. "Daddy, now you have to give Mama Emma a ring. In the movies, the grandpas always give a ring." Daniel and Emma burst out laughing at the same moment. For the first time in years, the house was filled with it. 3 chairs at the kitchen island. Hot bread on a wooden board. Morning sunlight laying pale gold across the floor. The faint scent of cinnamon in the air. For 10 miraculous minutes, they were not a mafia boss and his fugitive lover and a kidnapped child. They were only a family, eating breakfast. Daniel's phone buzzed against the marble. "Lucas." His brother's voice came through tight and fast. "Big problem. The O'Briens know Sophia is alive. They know you are alive. Victoria has reported everything. The war has started. Daniel set down his coffee. The warmth fell out of his face like a curtain coming down. The boss was back in the room. Where are you? Brooklyn. Met an old contact. Connor is mobilizing 50 men. They're going to hit every property they even suspect you of being at. Come home. Now. I want the perimeter doubled before dark. Emma was already reaching for Sophia's hand. She did not need to be told. She had learned the rhythm of that voice the first morning in the estate kitchen. 6:15 a.m. When everything had changed. Daniel looked at her across the counter. I am not losing you. Either of you. Not ever. I know. Emma answered softly. Outside, the November wind rose off the sound and pressed against the tall kitchen windows. The Mafia world did not allow its people to keep quiet mornings for very long. The storm was already on its way. 2 mornings later, the storm found a crack in the walls that no gunman could have forced. Sophia woke with a fever. By midday, her forehead was burning against Daniel's lips when he kissed it. 102. The little body that had endured 2 months on a filthy mattress was finally collapsing inward now that it was safe enough to do so. Dr. Martinelli was in Manhattan, treating another Moretti cousin shot in a warehouse skirmish and could not be moved for at least 6 hours. She needs fever reducer now, Emma said from the edge of Sophia's bed, pressing a cool cloth to the child's flushed cheek. And electrolytes, and a pediatric antibiotic if we can get one without a prescription. Daniel's jaw set. I'll send Tony. No, let me. Emma rose. I know the pharmacy in Oyster Bay. 20 minutes there, 20 minutes back. You need to be with her. She needs to see you when she wakes up. Too dangerous. O'Brien is hunting us. I'll wear a cap. Drive the unregistered Honda. Send 2 men behind me in another car. Her hand touched his wrist. Daniel, it's your daughter. He exhaled. Nodded once, against his every instinct. Marco and Giovanni followed at 50 meters in the second vehicle. The Honda wound down the back roads to Oyster Bay in the cold afternoon light. Emma bought children's acetaminophen, a cough syrup, a bottle of pediatric electrolyte solution, and a small bottle of multivitamins. The clerk smiled at her. She smiled back. Nothing felt wrong. She stepped out of the pharmacy onto the quiet sidewalk. A black van without plates crossed 2 lanes of traffic and slammed to a stop in front of her. The side door was already sliding open before the tires stopped smoking. 4 men in ski masks spilled out. Marco was out of his car in a heartbeat, pistol already up. The first shooter hit him high in the shoulder with a silenced round. Marco went down firing and dropped one of the masked men before his knees folded. Giovanni lunged for a second attacker and was clubbed across the temple with a collapsible baton. Emma did not scream. She drove her elbow into a masked throat, slammed the heel of her palm up into another man's nose, and caught the third in the groin with a clean kick. 3 years in the Moretti household, most of her weekends spent in the basement gym with Marco, had not been wasted. The 4th man closed from behind and pressed a needle into the side of her neck. The sky tilted. The paper bag of medicine slipped from her fingers and burst open on the pavement. Her knees struck concrete. She looked up at a gray, indifferent sky and her lips formed 2 words nobody would hear. Daniel. Sophia. Everything went black. The van lurched away. Marco, bleeding hard into his collar, dragged himself onto one elbow and keyed the radio with a shaking thumb. Boss. Emma. Taken. He passed out before the reply came. At the North Shore safe house, the coffee cup in Daniel's hand exploded against the kitchen tile. Blood welled from his palm. He did not notice. No. Sophia, still hot with fever, pushed herself upright in the doorway. Daddy? Where's Mama Emma? Daniel gathered her into his arms and pressed his mouth against her damp hair so that she could not see his face. Mama Emma is coming home soon, my angel. Daddy promises. Lucas arrived within 30 minutes with 20 armed men. Brother, what do we do? At 11 that night, an unknown number rang Daniel's private line. He put it on speaker. Mr. Moretti, the old, coarse voice was unmistakable. Connor O'Brien, my daughter tells me your little housekeeper ruined everything we built. I require compensation. Daniel's voice came out flat as a gravestone. What do you want? Simple. The Brooklyn port, your title signed over to me, and your daughter, delivered to Pier 7 at midnight tomorrow, in exchange for this charming woman. No police, no games, or she dies in pieces. I'll send you a video every hour until you agree. The first video arrived 60 seconds after he hung up. Emma was bound to a metal chair, a strip of tape across her mouth, a dark ribbon of dried blood crossing her temple. Her eyes were not afraid. Her eyes were furious. Daniel drove his fist through the dining table. Oak splintered. He felt nothing. He had buried Sarah 4 years ago. He could not bury Emma too, but he could not deliver Sophia. That was not a choice. That was 2 deaths instead of 1. He stood in the middle of the war room holding his head in his bloodied hands. I cannot choose. I cannot trade my daughter. But I cannot let her die, Lucas rose. Something in his shattered face had hardened into a new shape. Brother, I have a plan. I know Pier 7. I moved shipments through it for the O'Briens back when Victoria was still pulling my strings. I know the blind angles, the exits, the rhythm of their lookouts. Let me put our people inside before they arrive. Daniel lifted his head slowly and looked at his brother. For the first time in his life, he was about to place his full weight on Lucas Moretti. You sure? I betrayed you once. I will not betray you twice. I swear it on our mother's soul. Let me lead this one. Let me prove it. Daniel nodded. Then we go together. Later that night, he sat beside Sophia as her fever finally broke. Daddy has to go get Mama Emma, my angel. Aunt Rosa is going to stay with you. Small arms locked around his neck. You have to come back. Promise. Daniel pressed his lips to her forehead. I promise, sweetheart. The clock on the wall ticked toward a new midnight. 24 hours to the last fight. Pier 7 rose out of the Brooklyn fog like a graveyard made of steel. A thin, cold rain slicked every surface. Rows of rust-streaked containers stood stacked 5 high along the loading quay, each one tall enough to hide a man, each one angled just wrong enough to create 1,000 shooting lanes. 4 hours before the meet, Lucas Moretti had moved 15 of Daniel's most seasoned gunmen into those stacks one at a time. Through a drainage access he had learned 2 years earlier, on a Victoria-arranged errand, each rifleman had a pre-assigned sector. Each had memorized the crossfire pattern. Outside the perimeter, Marco had posted 25 more men in parked vans and rooftops, holding the exits. At midnight exactly, a black Mercedes rolled onto the pier. Marco drove. Daniel sat in the rear in a black overcoat and tie, as calm as if he were arriving at a board meeting. 30 O'Brien soldiers formed a semicircle at the far end of the quay. Connor stood at their center in a long gray coat, his silver hair damp from the mist. Victoria stood at his side in black combat pants and a tactical jacket, a pistol holstered against her thigh. Between them, shoved forward on her knees, was Emma, wrists bound behind her, tape across her mouth, dried blood crusting her temple. Her eyes were not afraid. Her eyes were iron. Daniel stepped out of the car alone. Bring the child! Connor barked across the wet concrete. I don't see her. Daniel walked 10 steps and stopped. Sophia isn't coming. Only me. Take me in her place. Victoria laughed, high and brittle. How touching, Mr. Moretti. But I want all 3. You, your daughter, and your precious maid. All 3 of you die tonight. Daniel's voice dropped a full octave. No, tonight no one dies except you. His thumb tapped the face of his wristwatch. The pier erupted. Lucas and the 15 men in the stacks opened fire in one synchronized sheet of muzzle flashes. 10 O'Brien gunmen fell in the first 3 seconds. Connor's line broke. Men dove behind pallets. Victoria screamed an order. The night became a chorus of metal striking metal, of ricochets screaming off container walls, of muffled cries absorbed by steel. Daniel sprinted straight for Emma. He put 2 rounds into the man who had been holding her collar, a third into the man who had been holding the gun. He dropped to one knee beside her, flicked open his boot knife, and cut the zip tie from her wrists in one motion. Are you hit? Emma shook her head against his shoulder. No, Daniel. Victoria. He turned his head a half-second too late. Connor O'Brien had stepped out from behind a crate 20 feet behind him. The old man had a snub-nosed revolver leveled squarely at Daniel's spine. His finger was already tightening on the trigger. Lucas saw it from across the pier. He was in a firefight with 2 men at once, his own pistol half empty, his cover crumbling under machine gun bursts. He did not weigh the math. He did not hesitate. He broke from his cover and threw himself across open ground with every last ounce of strength his 32-year-old body could spend. He slammed into Daniel's shoulder and drove them both to the wet concrete. The revolver cracked. The bullet punched through Lucas's right shoulder, high, an inch above where a heart would have been. He dropped hard beside his brother, gasping, crimson blooming across his jacket. Lucas! Daniel rolled up onto one knee with his pistol already rising. He fired 5 times in a single breath. Every round found Connor O'Brien's chest. The old man staggered backward, hit the steel of a container with a wet thud, and slid down into a growing black pool on the rain-soaked concrete. He was dead before his head touched the ground. Father! Victoria's shriek tore across the pier. She bolted toward him, weapon forgotten. Emma moved faster. She pulled a fallen pistol from beside a dead O'Brien soldier, braced it in 2 shaking hands, and squeezed off a single round. Victoria's leg buckled beneath her. She went sprawling across the concrete, screaming. No, 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 Emma limped over and stood above her. The pistol hung steady at her side. Her face was carved from ice. You almost killed the child I love. You almost killed the man I love. You deserve a bullet through your mouth. Victoria's whole body shook. Please, please, I was only Emma's finger did not move on the trigger. Slowly, deliberately, she opened her fingers and let the pistol drop onto Victoria's stomach. No, you are going to live. You are going to regret every single day of the 40 years you spend in a cell. Daniel was already crouched over his brother. Lucas, look at me. Lucas managed a crooked smile through the blood pooling at the corner of his mouth. Brother, I'm sorry. Don't talk. Medics are coming. Marco's voice crackled in the earpiece. Pier cleared, boss. 28 down, 2 surrenders. We lost 3. 5 wounded. Sirens spilled in from the boulevard. Not NYPD. Federal sedans. Daniel had called his one remaining honest contact at the FBI 48 hours earlier with a flash drive that named Captain Mackenzie and every officer on O'Brien's payroll. Agents in windbreakers swarmed the pier. Victoria was rolled onto her stomach and cuffed where she lay. Paramedics loaded Lucas onto a gurney. Emma was wrapped in a thermal blanket. Daniel pulled her into his chest and did not let go. I thought I was going to die, she whispered, finally breaking apart. Daniel kissed the bruise at her temple. I will never let you die, Emma. Never. The first gray light of dawn was beginning to rise over the East River. One long chapter had finally closed. But on the gurney rolling toward the ambulance, Lucas Moretti's eyes were fluttering shut, and his fate still hung, raw and uncertain, between heaven and the brother he had once betrayed. 3 days later, in the quiet, private wing of a Manhattan hospital, Lucas Moretti opened his eyes. The bullet had torn through the muscle of his right shoulder. It had missed his heart by a single inch, an inch bought by a thin Kevlar vest he had buckled under his dress shirt that afternoon. The last quiet act of a man who had fully prepared himself not to come home. His right arm lay wrapped from elbow to collarbone. Beside his bed, in a plastic chair that was far too small for him, Daniel sat with his brother's good hand clasped in both of his own. He had not let go in many hours. Why did you do it? Daniel asked softly. You knew Connor O'Brien would put the first round through you before he ever reached me. Lucas managed a small, crooked smile. Because I am your brother. I finally remembered that. I had forgotten it for 20 years. Before I was ever the brother of a boss, I was the brother of Daniel. Daniel could not speak. He bowed his head and pressed his forehead to his brother's knuckles, while 2 silent tears rolled down his cheeks. Thank you, he whispered at last. Thank you for coming back to me. Do you forgive me? Lucas's voice was barely there. I forgave you the second you pushed me to the ground. Perhaps before that, perhaps from the moment you came home and knelt before me. The door opened. Emma entered with a small butterfly bandage still at her temple, her hand wrapped around Sophia's. The little girl rushed to the bedside, climbed carefully onto a stool, and pressed a soft kiss to her uncle's fingers. Get better fast, Uncle Lucas. I'm going to draw you a picture. Lucas's whole tired face lit up. I promise I will be well, my little angel. Outside the hospital, New York was still roaring about the Battle of Pier 7. The papers did not know the truth. They only knew that Connor O'Brien was dead, that Victoria Sinclair had been taken in federal custody, and that an FBI task force had opened a vault of evidence no one had expected. 2 weeks later, Victoria stood in a federal courtroom, the files Emma had built in vents and closets, the recordings Sophia had memorized with the stubbornness of a child, the ledger from the crocodile leather case, and the testimony of both Moretti brothers buried her in a single afternoon. Kidnapping of a minor, attempted murder, racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy against a family that was not even listed on the indictment. The sentence came down clean and final. 40 years, no parole. With Connor dead and Victoria in a cell, the O'Brien empire folded within a month. Lieutenants surrendered, soldiers vanished. The Brooklyn port returned to Moretti hands. Captain Mackenzie was arrested on film receiving a bribe that no longer existed, tried on evidence Daniel had saved for exactly such a day, and sentenced to 15 years. 1 week after Lucas left the hospital, the family returned to Woodlawn Cemetery. It was an autumn morning this time, bright and golden, the opposite of the cold rain that had baptized the beginning of this story. Sunlight lay soft across the yellow leaves. Daniel, Emma, and Sophia walked together along the quiet path. Lucas followed a few steps behind, his right arm in a black sling, a small bouquet of white lilies held carefully in his left hand. They stopped before a headstone that should never have existed. Sophia Moretti, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts. Daniel laid his palm against the cold marble. His eyes filled, but not with grief this time. With relief, with something beginning. Sophia tugged at Emma's hand. Mama, Emma, we don't need this stone anymore, do we? Emma smiled through her tears. No, sweetheart, we don't. Daniel laughed, truly laughed for the first time in 4 years. No, my little angel, we don't. He set his shoulder against the marble and pushed. Once, twice. On the third push, the heavy stone rocked off its base and toppled forward, breaking cleanly in two against the earth. The sound echoed through the cemetery like a door closing on an old life. Sophia stepped onto the broken pieces. She looked up at the sky with a small, fierce face her mother would have recognized. I was not born to be buried. I was born to live. With my daddy. And my mama Emma. Daniel drew Emma into his arms. He kissed her forehead. Then, without hesitation and without shame, he kissed her mouth, a long, real, unhurried kiss beneath the bright autumn sun. Emma was crying and laughing at once. I love you, Daniel. I have loved you for 3 years. And I loved you from the moment you placed that small phone on the kitchen counter and saved my life. Perhaps before that, I simply did not know how to see it. Sophia crashed into both of them with her little arms spread wide. We are a family, and a family is never apart. A few steps away, Lucas knelt at a different headstone. Sarah Moretti, beloved wife, mother, taken too soon. He laid the white lilies gently against her name. Then he rose and met his brother's eyes across the grass, and Daniel dipped his chin once, and something very old was laid to rest between them. 4 people walked out of Woodlawn Cemetery that morning, into the light. In the car, Sophia sat between Daniel and Emma, one small hand inside each of theirs. Lucas rode up front beside Marco. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance. The city breathed. 3 years ago, Emma had been a nameless young woman with a borrowed name, a forged past, and nothing but a debt to pay. Today she was a mother, a partner, a woman rebuilt from the ashes of every lie that had ever tried to swallow her. 4 years ago, Daniel had buried a wife and believed love had died inside him. Today he understood that love does not die. It only waits for the right person to walk through the right door. And Sophia, 6 years old, had lived through things no child should ever live through. But today she had a father, a new mother who had chosen her, an uncle who had bled for her, and a family whole again. Some stories do not end with a grave. Some stories begin again, the moment you choose to live, to love, and to forgive. The Moretti family had chosen all 3. Dear friends, thank you for walking this journey with us all the way to the end. This story is a story about choices. The choice to stay silent or to speak. The choice to give up or to hold on one more day. The choice to hate or to forgive a brother who comes home on his knees. Daniel was a powerful man, but his power did not save his daughter. A quiet woman named Emma saved her, armed with nothing but loyalty, patience, and the memory of a stranger who had once put a coat around her shoulders in the rain. That is the gentle truth this story wanted to share with you. The people who truly change our lives are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who stay, the ones who keep showing up, the ones who love us without asking for anything in return. Kindness always finds its way back to the one who plants it. Truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always rise to the light. And family, real family, is not simply the blood we are born into. Family is the people who choose us on the hardest days of our lives, and the people we choose back. Now we would love to hear from you. Which part of this story touched your heart the most? Has there ever been an Emma in your own life, someone who quietly protected you when you did not even know you needed protecting? Or perhaps you were an Emma for someone else. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories, your feelings, your memories are truly what make this channel a home. If this story moved you, even a little, please take one small moment to hit the like button, share this video with someone you love, and subscribe to our channel with notifications turned on. Every click helps us bring more heartfelt stories like this one to you, every single day. From all of us here, we wish you a life filled with good health, gentle days, and the kind of love that stays. May your family be whole, may your heart be peaceful, may every tomorrow be a little brighter than the one that came before. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now, and we will see you again in the next story.